Welcome to the All Access Entertainment Podcast. I am your host, Joseph Bruen. With me this week, a very special guest. You deserve a very special introduction. A man behind the scenes in the world of not only pro wrestling, but sports and the world of marketing. Of course, director of corporate research at Turner Broadcasting System Incorporated, TBS, of course, the Superstation. Director of marketing services for WCW. You worked for Coca-Cola, CBS Television Network. You've done it all, and we're going to talk about it all today. Take a deep dive into your career and your life. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Richard Steinberg. Easy for me to say.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So rewinding to the very beginning, growing up as a child, I know you were a wrestling fan. When did you first discover pro wrestling? Who were some of your favorites?
Well, I discovered pro wrestling about 1948 to 52, somewhere in that range. I'm going to guess it's more closer to 52. My parents used to drop me off at a babysitter's, and the man I was with there, he loved pro wrestling. So together we used to watch a lot of the programming while I was there in time with him. So I actually grew up watching Gorgeous George and a lot of the old network stuff from Dumont Television Network, which no longer exists in the States, but was the forerunner of a lot of the wrestling shows in the world.
What were some of your hobbies growing up? Were you into sports? And obviously you entered a huge world of marketing. When did that interest come along for you?
Sure. My hobbies basically were photography and travel. And then I was a big sports fan, especially baseball and professional hockey. And I had a chance to meet different players over the time, which enhanced my ability to meet and greet different players. And I always had this love for professional wrestling. So wherever I traveled, I always used to carry some documents with me or unsigned baseballs or unsigned hockey pucks or whatever, in case I ran into people on planes or in hotels or wherever I was at. So my love of marketing came from when I was at university. And my major was in business administration, and my minor was in broadcasting. So I always thought that if I really bombed in my professional career, I could always get on television someplace.
Wow, that's great. And, prior to your time in pro wrestling, why don't you tell us about your early days of marketing when you first got in?
Sure. After I graduated from University of Maryland, my first jobs were working for ad agencies in the Washington, D.C. area, and had a chance to get involved again with wrestling because the agency I worked for did a lot of promotion for the Capitol Wrestling, which was Vince McMahon's promotion in the Washington, D.C. area. So the more I got involved with marketing, I got actually a little bit sidetracked and involved with marketing research. It provided kind of a basis for me to understand how to best market products, consumer goods and products. So from that standpoint, I had an opportunity to grow, and I worked for different companies and organizations, honing my marketing skills, and somewhere along the way made a career out of it.
Wow. And what a career it's been. And, you'd go on to director of marketing services for WCW, like we spoke about, World Championship Wrestling. So what year was that exactly when you got your foot in the door, and how did you get into that company?
Okay. Well, I actually was hired by Turner Broadcasting. I was working at Coca-Cola as a director of market research role with new product development and design. So I worked on new products like Cherry Coke and Sprite and Diet Sprite and other products. And then one day I came to the realization that there was more in the world than sugar-flavored carbonated water. And I had a chance to know people at Turner Broadcasting. and an opening came available for director of corporate research position there, which intrigued me because it gave me an opportunity to work with all different television networks, all different properties that Turner owned. And I had an opportunity to do literally everything and anything I wanted to within the company under my corporate role.
And what interactions, if any, did you have with Ted Turner himself over the years? Did you get to have any interactions with him?
Sure. In my corporate role, as I said, I worked on a lot of different development of different television networks like Turner Network Television, Cartoon Network, and so forth. So I had a number of interactions with him in my development process of these networks. And the head of personnel for Turner Broadcasting was a man named Bill Shaw. And at that time, Bill Shaw had been made in charge of World Championship Wrestling. And it was one of the minor properties that Turner owned. It was losing a significant amount of money over the years, and especially was second or tertiary to World Wrestling Federation. And they had an idea that it needed to be a money maker rather than a money loser. And they came to me and asked me to do some development work to better understand the product and how to fix the product so that it could become profitable.
And what were some of those things that you would look closely at, to try to figure a way to kind of get neck to neck with the World Wrestling Federation?
Sure, Joseph. I spent a significant amount of time traveling the U.S. doing focus groups among wrestling fans all over the country, trying to discern and ascertain the differences between the WWE and then was called WWF, of course, and the WCW product. We spent a lot of time doing these in-depth focus groups across the country. I also went on what I call an arena tour. I went all over the U.S. to arena shows that WWE, WWF were doing at the time. And I got a chance to meet with fans and observe the shows. And I studied the content of the shows. I studied the timing of the shows. I studied the dynamics of the programs. I studied all of the different marketing streams, whether it be merchandising or 800 telephone lines or magazines or whatever else. And I put together at that point a rather comprehensive volume of analysis difference between the two programs and identified the various opportunities where WCW had a chance to grow and compete against WWF, WWE, and hopefully set them straight on a course to a money-making operation.
And, one of those major commodities that you were in charge of, like you mentioned, was merchandising. You were responsible for merchandising, a very important part of any wrestling organization, really, especially if you're doing it right. What are some of your memories working with the merchandise of WCW? What were some of if you could remember, some of the biggest hot items, hot sellers, some of the things that didn't really move?
Well, when I went into WCW, after I did the analysis of the programming and the content, and I wrote this volumetric report, I didn't hear anything back from Turner executives for maybe 4, 5, 6 month period of time. I continued in my corporate role. And then one fateful day, Bill Shaw and Ted Turner both came to me and said, "We like your plan. We want to adopt your plan. And we're transferring you from your corporate role to a role working directly at WCW."
Wow.
So at that point in time, I transitioned myself over to the organization, and I had what was considered a lot of resistance from the old-time wrestlers, especially people like Dusty Rhodes and people who claimed they knew what made money and how the wrestling business worked. But these guys, while they did make money before, things that they did 20 years ago no longer worked in the current time frame. And they were still relying on their old schemes and their old storylines and their old things to try and make things work. So what we tried to do was modernize it a little bit, put some twists on the things. I inherited a warehouse full of old merchandise that was sitting around, thousands and thousands of dollars of old T-shirts and other types of items that were never going to move anywhere. So one of the first things I did was liquidate everything in the warehouse. And I changed the operation around so that WCW wasn't incurring huge financial losses by holding merchandise like this. And I entered into an agreement with an organization in Chicago where together we created the merchandise, and they actually owned the merchandise, and I only took out the merchandise for each individual show that I needed. And then whatever sold, and we kept the profit on it and then paid the manufacturing expenses. And then whatever didn't sell went back into a warehouse in Chicago for use in a future program. Some of the great things that I had an opportunity to make were, of course, foam rubber 2x4s to use with Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and of course, a lot of merchandise for Hulk Hogan. We came up with some very creative designs, very modern types of T-shirts. We tested everything. I never put a product out there that consumers didn't want to buy. So anytime we had a design, we went out to the public, we did some market research. We asked people what they liked, what they didn't like. We found the items that would be potentially big sellers, because obviously you never know until you actually put it out there what's going to work. And everything we pre-tested before we put it into the marketplace. And 9 times out of 10, the new merchandise, the enhanced goods were big sellers. So the merchandising went from really a huge money-losing operation to a significant profit of several $1 million the first year that it was under my control.
Wow, what a turnaround. That's fantastic. Well, when it comes to merchandise, I've always been an avid collector of the 8x10 promotional photos. Can't get enough of them. I've always appreciated them. And, I've made a lot of great relationships with some of the photographers from that time period. And I still, to this day, collect the promotional photos whenever I can find any that I don't have. And do you remember any specific dealings with the promos, or do you remember any of those?
Well, I'm going to just swerve a little bit, because we also had a magazine at WCW, which fell under my control, and 800 lines and all different things. And we wanted to take these things from black and white publications, which were after magazines, if you will, at the time. And then we changed the publishers, and we went to 4-color products so that people would always have color photography from the magazine, and always a large centerfold for pro wrestler, hot pro wrestler in the middle each month that they could have with autographs or obtain autographs for it. So there was that aspect. And then we always did a lot of color photography in the studio for the 8x10s, promotionals for all the different stars. And obviously did a significant amount of promotional work with Hulk Hogan when he came to work for WCW.
So when it comes to the merchandise, how big of a crew did they have working at the live WCW shows for, pumping out that merchandise?
Well, it's kind of a strange entity, the way things work. Basically, each building has its own sales staff, and you come in with the merchandise, and the building sells the goods for you, and they take a percentage of the goods. So my team consisted of myself, an assistant. My assistant was Marco Canales, and Marco would go to the different live arena shows. And then I had 1 or 2 other people in the office. So it was really kind of a small staff. But when we went out on the road, whether it was domestic or international, basically we either had companies that did the selling for us, or the buildings themselves did the selling and then took a percentage cut.
Now, was there a favorite piece of merchandise that you kind of, shuffled through over the years, or helped produce, or whatever it may be?
Well, obviously all of the Hulk Hogan merchandise. When Hogan came to work for WCW, Obviously, we knew months ahead of time that he was going to come in, and we had a target date. So we created a lot of his classic items, like his do-rag and tearaway T-shirts and things like that. But we also made some unique things with belts and so forth. I spent a lot of time down in Tampa area. I flew down with the championship belt before he actually won the belt. And we did a lot of photography in the Don Cesar Hotel down there, and Jimmy Hart and Hulk Hogan and myself, and a professional photographer. So we captured all the photography work in one afternoon, and then we just applied it to all the different goods and products. But in the case of Hogan, he had an override control on the promotion of his merchandise, of what was produced and so forth. And so, not only did we have to work through that, but he also took a significant cut on the margin of the merchandise as well.
And was there a team or just one individual in charge of the concept art of some of those, items that were made?
Well, pretty much. I had a team of people that I worked with. If we were using the contractor in Chicago, I would go out there, and then we would have a design group to help design and manufacture the goods. And then that was pretty much it. There was no in-house group, if you will, to do that.
Okay. And when it comes to the 800 lines that you were in charge of for a while there, what did that entail exactly? What was your duty when it came to the 800 lines?
Well, I was responsible for all non-wrestling revenue streams, which included the magazine, the 800 lines, merchandise, et cetera, et cetera. Yep. So every day we had a different personality, whether it was the announcers or a different wrestler, whatever, and Gene Orkelin or whoever at that time would get on and do a promotion, a couple minutes. People would obviously call in. The company would get a revenue cut from the 800 line. And over time, it was a significant moneymaker. But as time went on, we noticed that the number of calls and therefore the amount of revenue that came in from those declined. And it reached a point in time where it wasn't cost effective to continue those things.
Okay. It's too bad. As a child growing up, that was always a big part of wrestling. Call the 800 line. And, it was
of course.
Yeah, but I could see it certainly winding down over time for sure. And when it came to the WCW magazine, so were you responsible for choosing who would appear on the cover at that time?
Yeah, well, I worked with a new publisher. I signed a deal with a gentleman out of the UK, Colin Bowman, who actually started out as the tour photographer for WCW on our international tours. And he and I put together a concept of the new WCW magazine to be this 4-color, valuable item that people would want to collect, not a waste of, black and white, no photography magazine that ultimately was being produced by the other company. So we negotiated a deal, and we created the whole new magazine. And as to the editorial content, Colin and I would develop it together. I would do the final edit on the magazine, and then it would go to press.
And were the magazines pretty lucrative at that time? Were they doing well?
Oh, absolutely. They were sold both online, and they were sold in the arenas. And at the live shows, it would make a significant amount of money.
And did the live shows also have specific programs as well, or would they use a WCW monthly magazine?
We would insert the live program inside the magazine for each show.
Okay. All right. And then, of course, what would you say is your greatest challenge within the wrestling industry, during your time?
Well, I would say getting some of the old-time wrestlers to accept modern marketing techniques. Their head was stuck back in 1963 when wrestling used to make money by doing X or Y or Z. And they constantly recycle the same thing with different stars, different players, similar storylines. And they do it because, quote, it made money before. Well, because it made money before doesn't mean it's going to make money now. And these things became very tired, and people recognized that it was repetitive, and they stopped making money. So, I would sit into the focus groups where people who were the bookers, in this case, specifically Dusty Rhodes, He was ordered to come sit with me behind the scenes and listen to what people had to say, his actual viewers, his actual people who attended the shows, and he refused to come. And it took Bill Shaw to order him to come, which obviously didn't make him a big fan of mine. But he would sit in the back of the mirror with me, and instead of listening to what the people had to say, the viewers, about his programming, he would sit there and crack jokes. And then he would get up and leave.
Wow. Jeez. So, beyond Bill Shaw, beyond yourself, beyond Ted Turner, who were some of the other figureheads specifically in WCW? Were there other people running the show as well?
Sure. When I started there, Bob Dew was in charge, and he had taken over from, I guess, Bill Watts at that time. There was a constant turnover of executives there. Bob Dew happened to be actually the arena that was there, CNN Arena. He was actually in charge of the arena, and Bill Shaw moved him from the arena to take over the wrestling show. So Bob basically had little to no background in wrestling. But he actually realized that things needed to change and we needed to move forward. Also, I should say that when I started my project, Jim Herd was actually in charge of WCW, and then he was booted out and then replaced by Bob Dew. So I actually worked with 3 or 4 people before it landed on Eric Bischoff.
Okay. So, we talked about your greatest challenge in the industry. On the flip side of that, what would you say was the most rewarding during your time in wrestling?
Well, the most rewarding to me was watching the shows take off, the new programs take off, the TNT shows, watching the financial streams improve, and watching people actually talk about the WCW programming. And before, it was considered more of a regional program, a southern show, whereas the Vince McMahon product was a more northern product. So it really went more mainstream under Eric Bischoff and his vision. So there's a lot of credit, besides a lot of non-credit, but Bischoff actually took the show and made it much more broad mass appeal.
Hmm. And when you weren't in the office specifically, if you're on the road or you're at the live shows, did you have any favorite venues, any favorite arenas over the years?
Well, I like the international arenas. I mean, I did 8 or 9 tours of Germany with the wrestlers, and mostly we played the same shows, the same buildings. And I thought the arenas in Germany were really cool. The fans were really into the product there. We sold a ton of merchandise. I made items specifically for the European market and contracted with vendors over in Europe. So I spent time going back and forth between London and Germany on different occasions to get things manufactured and approved. Like I said, we did market research, even in Germany, even in the UK, to make sure fans would like the things that we're bringing to the marketplace, and that we stood a better than average chance to sell the products. So I thought the European shows were really great.
And you mentioned, Dusty Rhodes, and some of the wrestlers were hesitant to adapt, obviously, to the new regime. Who would you say was the nicest to be around, the most helpful behind the scenes when you first arrived with WCW?
I like the most helpful were Sting and Ricky Steamboat. Those guys they understood and realized what needed to be done, even under the constraints of the booking mechanism that was there. So those 2 guys stand out to me. And even Brian Pillman was good, and Steve Austin were great to work with.
And through your dealings, what are your personal memories of Ted Turner and Bill Shaw? What were they like behind the scenes?
Well, Ted Turner always reminded people whose name was on the building and whose product it was. I mean, when he took over and created Turner Broadcasting, he put wrestling on the air. And in broadcasting, you pay rights for different products to broadcast. And movies cost an exceptional amount of money to pay for to actually broadcast on air. And wrestling was actually a cheaper form of programming than movies. So instead of contracting with MGM, Columbia, whoever for a movie product, putting on live wrestling shows were actually a cheaper way to go. So a lot of executives in Turner Broadcasting wanted to remove it from the air. And I remember several times Ted stomping around, slamming the door and telling people, this is my product, my name's on the building, and as long as I'm here, wrestling's going to air.
Wow. Okay. So he was very behind that. That's interesting.
Absolutely. Until he sold out.
Right. Now, when it comes to advice, all the different jobs that you've had throughout your career, all the different companies you've worked for, what was the best piece of advice you'd ever received, in your opinion?
Well, that's hard to say.
Dealing with so many people now.
Yeah, I mean, trying to look back over a 40-year or so career, I think the best piece of advice somebody gave me was don't go to work for wrestling, and I did it anyway.
Right. Right. Now, do you look at your time in wrestling, even though there were some challenges, do you look at it as a positive time in your career?
Oh, absolutely. I learned a lot. I gained a lot. I had an opportunity to spend quality time with a lot of the professional wrestlers, old timers, as well as the current stars, learning about history of wrestling, what was going on, who was doing this, how things are done, the way people are trained, the way things come to air. And I had a ball doing it. The only reason I stopped doing it was because every night you're in a different building and, you're in a different city. And after doing it for 3-4 years, one night I woke up and I didn't remember the hotel room I was in. I didn't remember the hotel I was in. I didn't remember the city I was in. And it was time for me to get off the wagon at that time.
And those 8 or 9 tours, the international tours that you were a part of throughout your time in WCW, obviously you hit Germany, the United Kingdom, Ireland, Switzerland, and other locations. What would you say? Did you have time to actually enjoy yourself and see the atmosphere there, or was it right to work and you didn't really get out of the grind?
No, I would make time during the day. I wasn't due into the building until about 1 o'clock or 1:30 in the afternoon. So in the mornings, I would always try to go out with one of the different guys. Sometimes it was Michael Capetta, the announcer, and I would go out. Sometimes it would be with a different wrestler. And we'd go out and we'd see parts of the city and then come back and like 1 o'clock or so to get into the building. So different tours operated different ways. The show would go on, obviously, somewhere around 7:30 at night, finish at 10 o'clock at night. And in some cities, we spent the night in the city and then took a bus the next day to the next city. In other cities and other tours, we left the building. We were traveling all night, got into a hotel 3 or 4 in the morning, and crashed, and then did the show the next day in the next city. So each tour operated a little differently.
Any notable flight memories with all that flying you were doing internationally? Anything funny or any road stories on the way there to and from?
Well, I remember the Nasty Boys. One time we were on a flight to the UK coming from the States, and Brian Pillman was asleep, and they took a razor. They were always big on gags, and they took a razor and they carved out the hair in the middle of the back of Brian Pillman's head, like a friar type of look. And then they took whipped cream and sprayed it on and put a cherry on top of it. So they were always a piece of work.
Wow. Now, chiming in, your inner fan of pro wrestling, who would you say is your personal Mount Rushmore of pro wrestling, top 4 within the industry?
Definitely Bruno Sammartino is my all-time favorite. And I grew up obviously watching him on Capitol Wrestling in U.S., at WTTG in Washington, D.C. And I actually had a chance to meet him when I worked with WCW and spend some time with him. Andre the Giant was another one. Interesting enough, one day I was assigned to babysit Andre at the CNN hotel. We were doing the Night of Champions, and that was the night that the championship belt turned from Vader to Ron Simmons. It was a historic moment, the first black champion in WCW history. And a lot of the stars, Lou Thesz, Bruno Sammartino, Andre the Giant, they were all there in attendance at the show. But I was assigned the day to kind of babysit Andre and make sure that he appeared where he was supposed to appear, although he spent the majority of the time at the bar at the CNN Hotel.
What was Andre like behind the scenes? I mean, was he, obviously he's drinking a lot, but, was he a nice guy?
Yeah, Andre was a gem. He was a pleasure to be around. And I had a great opportunity to spend 4, 5, 6 hours there, even though I was babysitting, but I got to hear stories of his life and stories about the wrestling business with him. And it was just great. So I would say that Bruno and Andre the Giant and even Lou Thesz, they were great guys to meet and to talk with.
So, speaking of international tours, you were right there front and center for one of the biggest moments in wrestling history for a long time. Vader, Cactus Jack, Germany. Obviously, Mick Foley loses his ear. Gary Michael Capetta's involved in that with you. Why don't you just tell us that whole story in depth?
Sure. We were doing a show, I believe it was in Wurzburg, Germany at that time. And Vader got Cactus Jack's head caught in the ropes and his ear popped off. So Gary Michael Capetta was the ring announcer at the time, and he's busy pointing to me that the ear is in the floor in the middle of the ring. And Gary was able to scrape it up and put it into a box, and they put it on ice. And I took the ear with me in the ambulance, and I went with Cactus Jack, Mick Foley, to the ambulance back in Frankfurt. We went back there, and I was in the hospital with him as they attempted to reattach his ear. And I was on the telephone back with Atlanta as all of this stuff was going on. And I was there pretty much of the night while he was getting his ear sewed back on.
Wow. And this is obviously a traumatic incident for Mick. What was his feedback? Was he speaking at all during this, or?
Yeah, he was just joking up the whole thing. I mean, and here I am in a box with his ear. It was pretty funny. And I left him in the hotel, and I went back to the hotel in Frankfurt, and all of the guys were busy partying with a lot of the fans in the hotel. And Hulk Hogan came out and went out in the street and picked up a motorcycle. Somebody had showed him his motorcycle, and he got on the motorcycle, went inside the hotel lobby, and was driving it around the hotel lobby while the hotel manager was chasing him, trying to get him to stop riding the motorcycle in the lobby. I would say he had a few too many to drink at that evening.
Yes. Yeah. Some of the things you see on the international tours. And of course, you were there firsthand for the infamous knife battle between Psycho Sid Vicious, Arn Anderson. Tell us all about that and your involvement.
Oh, yes. That was the first incident. And then the ear pop off was the second one. So I was known pretty much as riding around with all of the invalids of the tour. So we had pulled into the Moat House in Blackburn, England. It was somewhere about 2:00 in the morning. And the buses, we used to have 2 buses, one for the good guys, one for the bad guys, baby faces and heels. And I would always alternate which bus I rode so that the guys wouldn't think I was playing favorites with different wrestlers. So this trip, I was on the babyface bus. And we pull into Blackburn at the Moat House somewhere around 2:00 in the morning or so. Everybody's dog tired because we did this drive from another show. Instead of spending the night in the other city, we drove all night to get to Blackburn. And then I went up to my room and basically crashed. I was exhausted. And I don't know how much time went by. I'm going to guess it was about a half an hour, 45 minutes. And the telephone rang in my room, and it was the manager of the hotel. And he said, "Mr. Steinberg, we need you to come down to the lobby. There's been an emergency." And I said, well, I'm not the tour manager. I'm not the head of security. You need to talk to those two guys. They were the two ranking guys. I was the number 3 guy. And he said, oh, we can't find either of them, so you need to come down. Okay. So I scraped myself out of bed, got dressed again, and I got onto the elevator, and I noticed there was blood all over the walls of the elevator. And it didn't really register with me what was going on because I was so unconscious at the time. But take the elevator down to the first floor, get off the elevator, and there's blood all up and down the hallway and on the walls of either side of the hotel as I made my way to the lobby, the front lobby. And then I noticed that there were 2 doors on either side opposite each other that were open, excuse me, and there was smashed furniture in both rooms. Wow. So I'm kind of getting the picture here that something's going on with these guys, right? And I worked my way to the lobby, and Vicious and Anderson are both lying on the floor of the lobby. The whole front window of the moat house is blown out. There's glass all over the place. And these 2 guys are on the floor bleeding. Well, I see Too Cold Scorpio, Charles Skaggs. He's over with Arn, taking care of Arn. So I rush over to go to Sid. And I start putting my hands on the holes where the blood is coming out. So, I'm trying to hold the blood in because there's no bandages, there's nothing there. And we're waiting for the ambulance to come. So finally the ambulance comes, and I'm in the ambulance with Sid on the way to the hospital. Now, Sid was supposed to take over and become the world champion in another couple of weeks. But Sid starts crying that he blew his chance. He's not going to be champion anymore. He doesn't want to die. And I mean, it was just like, I couldn't believe it. I got this huge 6-foot-something or other guy acting like he's 4 years old. And I'm trying to hold the blood in, and the technician in the ambulance is trying to do the same thing. So we get into the hospital, and Sid and I go into one room. Arn and Scorpio go into another room. And I'm with the doctor, and the doctor tells me that I have to leave to go out. So Sid is still crying that he doesn't want to die, that he lost his chance to be champion. It's horrible. I come out, Charles Skaggs, Scorpio, and I start talking about what's going on, what happened. I get on the telephone and I call back to Atlanta. And obviously there's a 5-hour time difference between the UK and Atlanta. So I can't raise anybody per se in the WCW office. But finally, I got the operators at Turner Broadcasting to finally get hold of Bischoff and some other people. And I stayed at the hospital overnight with Sid, and Charles Scorpio stayed at the hospital overnight with Arn. The next day, obviously, went back to the hotel, and it was my responsibility to deal with the damages at the hotel. So my Turner credit card limit had to be extended quite a large amount to cover the blown out window, to cover out the blood that was extensive all over the hall, the elevator, the broken furniture in the rooms, the carpets, whatever. So I was there. I went off the tour, and I stayed there for a couple of days. And then it was my responsibility to get each of the guys to a different airport to fly back to the United States. So I had arrangements with Atlanta to take Sid to one airport. I had arrangements with them to get Arn back to a different airport. And I finally put them in the taxi to get the heck out of the UK. I also had to work with the police in the UK to make sure that no charges were filed by the hotel or by the police, and that they would actually release the guys and let them go out of the country, because they wanted to file charges against each other. So I had to convince them not to do that. And then again, I stayed back to make sure all the damages were taken care of. And then about 3 or 4 days later, after that, I hopped a train and met the tour up in Birmingham, England.
Wow. And did either of them end up getting punished for that situation?
Yeah, they were fired.
They were
both,
both fired. Okay,
both
wow.
fired. Yeah.
Yeah, not surprising. I mean, you can't be stabbed.
Oh, so the Moat House is indelibly in my memory.
Mm. And was there any reasoning for it? Did you hear the story as to why it
Sure.
started?
But apparently, they were on the heel bus, and they were having an argument who the bigger star was. And they got off the bus. They went into the bar at the hotel, which unfortunately was still open at 2 o'clock in the morning. And after having several rounds of drinks, they were still in this quote discussion who the bigger star was. So apparently, they both went back to the room, and I don't remember who started the thing, but there was a knock on one door and somebody smashed a chair on the other one's head. And then Arn took his beard trimming scissors and stabbed Sid. And then Sid grabbed the scissors and stabbed Arn. And that's how it materialized.
Unreal.
But I was basically becoming known as the ambulance guy on the tours.
Yes, yeah. What would the tour do without you? My goodness.
That's it. I mean, had to be there.
Yes, right time, right place for you for sure. Or maybe wrong time for you. I don't know how you look at it. But when it comes to Eric Bischoff, you mentioned, there was a little paranoia with him. Why don't you tell us that story?
Eric was a piece of work. And I mean that sincerely. He was paranoia about everything. He was paranoia about information leaking. The WWE was always getting information about secret stuff that was going on in the office. But one of the things that Eric didn't figure out was that in the mail room, which is across from Eric's office, was the company fax machine. And anytime I would walk in to get my mail, I could see who passed their drug test, who failed their drug test, whose contract was being signed as a new star. It didn't take much to figure out there wasn't a lot kept secret, even though he professed it to be.
Interesting. And when it came to the drug tests, how often did they do that around there back then?
Can't tell you because it wasn't part of my side of the business. But I mean, when somebody was coming in, they definitely did a drug test. And then after a while, they imposed a more stringent rules about the drugs. And they were more careful about who they hired and who they didn't hire. And I think Bill Shaw had a lot to do with that.
And you mentioned Charles Skaggs. Do you have any memories of Too Cold Scorpio during your time?
Yes, he was a great guy, a wonderful guy to be around, true professional. Several tours of Europe I did with him, and he and I would meet for breakfast, or we would go out and do some things together. He was a great wrestler, a great talent, very athletic gentleman. And I was actually sad to see what they created his character for in the WWE. I thought he was much better with his Too Cold Scorpio persona in WCW. And
if his partner for a while in WCW was Marcus Alexander Bagwell, any memories
Correct.
of Marcus?
Yeah. I mean, when we did a lot of these tours, I was able to get Charles and Marcus together to do some signings before the events. I had to bribe them a little bit. I had, like you said, the 8x10 pictures and the color stuff I carried with me. And I had to offer to take them to dinner or some other bribe to get them to sit down for an hour with fans to do some signings. But they were cool guys to be around.
And another individual that was there around that time, Johnny B. Bad, Mark Merrow.
Right,
any memories of Mark?
Yeah, Mark also was a very nice person. Mark's character, if you may recall, he had a blaster type of gun that shot confetti out when he stepped into the ring. And he kept pressuring me to manufacture a gimmick with guns like that to sell to the public. So I kept telling him that, you could shoot somebody's eye out if we sold things like that. So he was not happy that I wouldn't create the blaster guns for merchandise sales. But again, I enjoyed my time with Mark very much.
Cool idea, but probably not the best item for children, I don't think.
No, I wouldn't think so. I mean, the other thing is, we used to make masks, millions of them in the building. Some local people produced them for me, and a very inexpensive thing to manufacture, and put the WCW logo on them. And I was worried that there would be some video at an ATM machine somewhere around Atlanta or some other city with somebody trying to rob a bank or whatever, using the wrestling masks I produced. But God, it was a big seller.
And you mentioned off camera the Hollywood writers. Were they involved in scripting WCW at all?
Oh God, that was an awful period of time. I mean, Bischoff and Bob Dew and others people, they figured out that since wrestling was a soap opera, they would hire these soap opera writers to actually create the programming. And it was a disaster. These guys had no concept of professional wrestling whatsoever. And they didn't last very long, but they would come in from Hollywood on Mondays and go back on the weekends. And they would be all locked in meetings. You never saw them except when they came out for lunch or the bathroom. But they would create horrible product.
And through the years that you were there, can you pinpoint what year that was that they were there, or do you not remember?
I'm sorry, I don't remember at this time, Joseph. I mean, there was so much stuff going on there at different times.
Right. When you're not breaking up fights, you're trying to.
Oh yeah, I mean, the Nasty Boys, they were also a gem to work with. By the way, Knob still owes me $10, but man, that's another story. They nearly got arrested in Hamburg, Germany, on 2 or 3 tours. And I always had these visions of newspapers back in Atlanta saying, WCW executive arrested with pro wrestlers because, oh God, the stuff they would do, the stuff they would pull. And I mean, at one time they wanted to see a live sex show. And this is in Hamburg, Germany. And we walked into the place and they decided they needed to go to the bathroom. So instead of going to the bathroom, they did it at the table. And the police came and fortunately talked my way out of that one. But it was, everything with them was a real treat every night.
So when it comes to Germany, another thing that you were a part of was a special dinner with Ric Flair, Ricky Steamboat, just the 3 of you out to dinner in Germany. Why don't you tell us about that dinner and some of the memories from that?
Sure. One night before we did the show in Leipzig, Germany, I was standing next to Flair and Steamboat, and they were talking about going to dinner. And I asked if I could join along. So the 3 of us went out to dinner. It was an absolutely amazing dinner because I got to hear the history of the 2 of them and their classic battles in arenas across the United States. And it was one of the more amazing times of my professional career, just to be able to sit with these 2 legends and hear the story of their background.
Then, of course, bar hopping in Germany, Hamburg to be exact, with the likes of Steve Regal and Bill Dundee and Vader. What are your memories of those guys?
Sure. One time we got into Hamburg. It was about 11 o'clock at night on the buses. And the guys all decided they wanted to go to the red light district rather than go to their hotel rooms. So they dumped their luggage in the lobby and they grabbed every available taxi cab and headed to the red light district. That left myself and Colin Bowman, who was the tour photographer at the time, in the lobby of the hotel. So we decided, well, we're not going to sit around and be left behind. We just grabbed an available taxi and went down and found the area, So we started walking along the street and then came across the bar where the Beatles got their start. And all of a sudden I hear banging on the glass window at front. And I looked up and Bob Dew, who was obviously the director of WCW at that time, and a couple of the wrestlers, in this case, Steve Regal and Bill Dundee, who was being Sir William at the time, they were there having drinks, and they invited us in. So on these tours, I basically didn't drink, but that night they coerced me into a couple of beers. So we had a couple of beers there, and then we left that bar and we went to another bar, and there was a couple of beers there, and another bar and a couple of beers there. And next thing I know, it's about 7 o'clock in the morning, and we wind up in a British bar, which is obviously where Regal and Dundee wanted to be. So Bob Dew said he had a meeting in the UK and had an airplane at 8 o'clock in the morning. He had to leave to go. So he left, and that left me with Dundee and Darren, Steve Regal, in the British bar with a few more beers. So I left about 8 o'clock in the morning, and they were still going strong. So this has been going on since about 11 o'clock at night.
Wow.
And for a person who doesn't drink, I wasn't feeling any pain at that particular time. Went back to the hotel, and in the lobby of the hotel, I ran across Scorpio and sat down, and he told me to have breakfast with him, which I did, barely functioning. And then I went to the front desk and I said, I'm due in the arena at 1:30. I want you to start calling me at 12 o'clock and call me every 15 minutes. And if I hadn't answered the door by 1 o'clock, I want you to come bang on the door. So I went into the room, I collapsed on the bed, and the next thing I know, there's banging on the door. I slept through every one of the phone calls.
Wow.
And scraped myself into the arena at 1:30 in the afternoon.
Oh my gosh. What a memory.
So that was my night on the town with Steve Regal and Bill Dundee.
And did you ever connect with them after the fact? Did they ask, or did you ask how long they were there? Or
yeah, I mean they were there till about 10 o'clock in the morning.
10, wow.
Yeah, I mean some of these guys have a bottomless pit for alcohol.
Right. Especially Andre. He's the one you got to look
at. Andre, God bless him, sat at the bar, bottles of champagne, bottles of wine, beer. I don't know how much he consumed. I mean, I lost track after a while, but it was like it didn't faze him.
Yeah.
He was a large man and he was used to it. Didn't bother him at all. I just had to make sure he got to the bar, got to the hotel room, got from the hotel room to the center stage where the TV show was, and then my responsibility was over.
Now, when he's in a public setting like that, are there fans approaching him, whether it be in the bar or the hotel?
Yeah, but you try and keep them at bay as much as possible.
Yeah.
The guys, I mean, some of them are willing to sign and do things, and others of them just don't want to be bothered.
Sure.
So it depends on the guy.
And famously, you had dinner with Triple H, Paul Levesque, the night before he left WCW for the World Wrestling Federation.
He got the call to go up to the big show and came in, gave his notice, and was gone a couple of days later. So some interesting opportunities came my way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Another great dinner that you had with Bruno Sammartino, one of your favorites, and Lou Thez. What was that experience like?
Well, anytime you get to sit down with some of these living legends, I sat there with my jaw open. I mean, dropped pretty much the whole time, because you get to hear the backstories on who did what and how it happened and whatever else. And these guys are the history of the sport. These guys made it happen. These guys created the sport. These guys created the history. And you can never get that type of education anywhere else, and it'll never happen again.
Do you have any specific memories of Harlem Heat over the years?
Yeah, Harlem Heat. When they first came in, I think it was Harley Race wanted to make them into a chain gang, which obviously had its racial overtones and was not going to work very well, especially under Ted Turner or anyone else at the time. Right. But the guys were very nice. Again, I pried a couple of autograph sessions out of them and a couple of tours of Germany with some a couple of dinners. And the guys usually had a lot of entertaining going on in the rooms in the evening. So I didn't interfere with that.
You mentioned that, some of the WCW blunders over the years. Anything come to mind that you haven't already talked about?
Well, there was a show in Baltimore that was advertised as a mixed show with male and female wrestlers in the ring at the same time, and it had been heavily promoted on the air, on television, on radio, in person by the different wrestlers. And 10 minutes before the match took place, the Maryland Athletic Commission came in and nicely reminded WCW management that the Maryland athletic rules refused and didn't allow that to happen. So the match had to get changed at the very last minute, and it never occurred.
Wow. Another night would come, you'd have drinks with Billy Robinson and Mike Graham.
Oh yeah, that was in the Marriott, the lobby of the Marriott Hotel in Baltimore again. Got to hear about Billy and his catch wrestling history. He and Graham were old friends. And Graham himself, actually, in ring, was a great performer. I think he was not recognized as much, but he was an excellent performer in ring. And the two guys were wonderful. I mean, I also had a wonderful opportunity because the ring crew with WCW who would set up the rings in the various arenas. The lead guy on it was Klondike Bill Solowski. And Bill was an old-time Canadian wrestler. So before the shows and before he had to do his work, I would come into the arena a couple hours ahead of time and sit down with him and hear his stories about his life and things that he did. Absolutely incredible. I've had some unreal opportunities that, like I said, they will never happen again, and nobody else will ever have them, to hear the history of the sport and how life was in professional wrestling in its early days.
And would Klondike Bill just assist in setting up the rings, or was WCW actually renting them from Bill?
No, Bill came along with the Crockett Promotions. Bill was actually working for Crockett when Turner bought it. And he and a guy named Gordon, and I'm sorry, I forget Gordon's last name. These two guys were the ring crew. They would travel from city to city setting up the rings.
And you mentioned Gordon. Let's talk about another Gordon. You had cocktails with Gordon Soley. Not many.
All the time. Gordon and I would, after the shows, we would be in the bar, and he would just be hanging his head about how terrible the product was and what idiots the people were in management. And obviously that didn't go over well with management, but he didn't care. He, as an old timer, he knew what was best for the sport and what it needed to do. And he wouldn't take crap from anybody. God bless him. Gordon was a great man. And I really miss Gordon.
Yeah, Gordon, one of the true greats in the world of commentary, of course, for pro wrestling. What was he like behind the scenes as a man?
Oh, I think he was a very gentle man. I mean, he was always very soft-spoken with me, and then, put a microphone in his hand and became a different personality. But I would go into the production studio. At WCW, the offices were on, I forget the floor. I want to say it was the 7th floor of the North or South Tower. And the actual production studios were down on the first level in the CNN Center. And I would, a couple times a week, kind of meander down to the production studios and sit around with the Craig Leathers, who was the director, and Gordon and other people down there in production, and kind of watch what was going on and glean some stuff. So Gordon used to moan about how terrible stuff was, and these guys didn't know what the hell they were doing, and it ultimately got him fired.
So once the Hollywood writer phase kind of fizzled out, who kind of took over for the booking? Do you remember at that time, or?
Well, there were so many different bookers, Joseph. I really don't remember the chronological part to this, but Kevin Sullivan was doing booking, Dusty was doing booking. I mean, when I was doing the research phase, I went into Dusty's office, and he had yellow pads, yellow writing pads, stacked from floor to ceiling. And I said, what the heck is this? He said, oh, these are the different shows. I said, what do you mean these are the different shows? He said, well, when I'm sitting in the toilet or I'm sitting in here, I would write out what the shows would be, and these were the shows. So instead of having the psychology of building on one show, what you're doing here, it builds to the next show, and it builds to the next show, and it builds to the next show. He would create these cold television shows. They're called cold shows. And he would just put people together on a yellow pad, and there was your show Tuesday night. There was your show Friday.
Wow. So it was really that simple. It just kind of came together like that.
Yeah, well, to him it was.
Yeah. So, why don't you talk about...
Meanwhile, audience was declining, but,
Right, exactly. Maybe not the right mind at that time. Dusty has a great mind in the business, of course, but, maybe at that time it was just kind of time to move on to another.
Yeah. I mean, there was also committee. There was Hogan and Sullivan and Flair was the booker at sometimes. I mean, my God, there were so many guys in and out of that job. I don't remember.
That's the problem. When you have too many cooks in the kitchen, it's not going to work,
No. And there was no chronological pattern to the thing. I mean, somebody would take over and they'd do it their way. Somebody would take over and do it their way. And you would get promoted if you were a friend of Flair. You would get promoted if you were a friend of Hogan. Didn't matter that you were the greatest star in the whole world, like Steve Austin. He was never going to become a star under those guys because they didn't want to relinquish their top positions to anybody.
What was Steve like with you backstage over the years?
Oh, Steve was a cool guy. He started out with Hollywood Blondes with Pillman. He and Pillman were a tag team. And then they broke up the tag team. And I remember a couple of times in Germany that we spent some time together. But I enjoyed with him. He was, again, these guys have two different personalities. That when they're outside of the ring, they're more or less human, except for one person who I'll name, and that's Flair. Flair was never human. But the other guys, you turn on the microphone and they become a different person. So Flair lived himself 24/7.
Right. What was your initial reaction when you saw Steve go on to the World Wrestling Federation and become such a big star?
Oh, I thought it was great. I mean, he created this stone cold character. I mean, after being suppressed in WCW for so long and treated like a thorn in everybody's side, it was great to see him. Actually, he was a wonderful talent. It didn't take much to see that, except the guys who were booking didn't want to see it.
And what else can you tell us about Brian Pillman around that time?
Pillman was a crazy guy. I mean, Pillman was always nice to me. I'll tell you my interesting Pillman story. One time, I forget what city we were in Germany. I was in the arena and it was kind of cool. So I had left my jacket on the tour bus. I went back to the tour bus to get my jacket and I see some commotion in the back of the bus. And there are three people in the back of the bus. There's Pillman and there's two guys with black medical bags like doctors. And I see them giving Pillman injections. Now, and I know what's going on.
Yeah.
Pillman says to me, "Oh, vitamins, brother. It's only vitamins." I said, "Okay." Nod my head, get off the bus, go back into the arena and do my thing. Well, it was clearly not vitamins. It was clearly steroids. But I never told anybody it. I never mentioned it to anybody. I mean, and Pillman was afraid that me being one of the suits, I would tell people back in Atlanta what was going on. I never said a word to anybody. And he recognized that fact, and he actually treated me way differently from that point forward. I was more of a friend with him, and he had apparently told the boys, what had happened. And they also, I became more a part of the gang rather than the suits versus the boys.
Yeah.
So by keeping my mouth shut, I pretty much became a valued part of the group with the men.
And what are your memories of working with Hulk Hogan and Jimmy Hart prior to the announced jump to WCW?
Sure. Once word came to me that they were bringing in Hogan, I was on the phone with him pretty much constantly for a couple-week period of time. And we arranged the photo shoot because we knew that the belt was going to transfer to him. Surprise, surprise. And I got on an airplane to Tampa. I had the belt in a gym bag with me. And Jimmy Hart picked me up at the airport. We went to the set of Thunder in Paradise, where Hogan was shooting the television show at the time. And we had to wait till he finished his shooting for the day. And then we went back to Jimmy Hart's house. Jimmy, God bless him, spent the next hour putting dye on his mustache and darkening his hair to remove his gray, which you and I can both attest to. Yes. We then went into the car to the Don Cesar Hotel, as I mentioned before, where we had the photographer waiting, and we had a photo shoot there for a couple hours. And then I went back to the airport. Jimmy dropped me. Oh, we first went to Hogan's house. And we dropped him off, and I got to meet his wife, Linda, at the time, and his daughter, Brooke and Nicholas. And then they took me back to the airport, flew back with the belt, and got home around 8:00 at night.
Wow.
Carrying the championship belt,
Sure. Now, obviously, Hogan, has been known to be behind the scenes, a little demanding, kind of pushing his weight around, but just working with him closely like that from time to time, what was he like?
Well, I was there to help make money for him and for WCW. And again, I think he treated me differently because of that. Never had a bad word with him, never had an ill situation. I would express some ideas for a product. He would express his ideas. We generally came to a meeting of the mind, stuff that we wanted to do, things would work. We would try this, we would try that. I found him to be a very cooperative person, and I enjoyed working with him.
And you were with World Championship Wrestling for a little over 4.5 years. What year did you depart WCW?
I'm sorry, I don't remember the time frame on years, but sure. I had an opportunity when I suddenly realized that this every night in a different city in a different arena wasn't working very well. I looked and found an opportunity with Blockbuster Entertainment in Fort Lauderdale. And I became director of marketing and research for Blockbuster in Fort Lauderdale. And when I left WCW.
What would you say was your biggest takeaway working for WCW?
Well, I think my biggest accomplishment was making it profitable. Not only increasing viewership and obviously ad revenue to the television show, but also the merchandise sales going from negative into several $1 million on the plus side the first year, and then doubling that in each succeeding year. So I significantly contributed to the bottom line for the development and continuation of that program.
Sure. And that's a great accomplishment from a business standpoint. And then looking on the other side of it, what would you say was your number one moment during your time in WCW, behind the scenes or even at work, either or?
Well, my number one moment was obviously the opportunities to meet with some of the old time wrestlers and my evenings with Bruen and Thez and Steamboat and so forth. That was worth its weight in gold. I didn't even need any salary to do that. Just sitting and talking with the guys was payment enough.
Right. And your first red-eye flight was with of course, the legendary Fabulous Moolah. Let's hear about it.
Oh, yes. And that was even before I was part of wrestling. I was working for Coca-Cola at the time. And I was doing a project for them out on the West Coast in California, and happened to take a red-eye. It was Eastern Airlines was still around at that time, back from Los Angeles to Atlanta. And this particular night, I got into the seat. It was about 11:45, midnight, something like that. I was in a first-class seat, and I had actually started to doze off. And all of a sudden, there was this giant thud, and the whole seat shook, and everything was shaking like this and that. And it woke me up, and I looked around and suddenly realized there was Moolah sitting next to me.
Wow.
And she had taken the championship belt and just had thrown it on the floor and just plopped herself literally in the seat. So That's how I spent the night with Moolah.
And how was she to talk to?
I honestly didn't speak. I was sleeping.
Yeah, that was the end of that, right?
Yeah, it was just kind of cool to be next to her, but yeah, I just needed to sleep. I didn't need to talk.
Right. What are your memories of Abdullah the Butcher?
Abby was a great character. My God, what a sporty dresser he was. I remember one time, again, this happened to be in the arena, the Baltimore arena. Actually, the night of the fatal so-called mixed match. I went back in the locker room, and Abby had finished his match earlier, and he put on the most fancy suit and tie, and he had a straw hat, and he had a cane, and he was dressed out of 1923. But I mean, my God, he was a huge man at that time, and I just remember him walking out of the building dressed to the nines. It was, wow.
You also had a very interesting elevator ride at the CNN Center with the Elegante, who would go on to become Johnny Gonzalez.
Yeah. Jorge Gonzalez. I was working at WCW, and I didn't know that he had actually signed at that time, but he had come to CNN Center to actually sign his contract. And I got on the elevator on the ground floor, and it was his manager and him. And I started to look up. I mean, I got on, and my head came to about his waist, and I'm just doing one of these, and I'm going on. I finally found his head, I was like, oh, this is interesting.
Is he a nice guy?
Yeah, he was very pleasant. Unfortunately, they actually brought him in to play basketball with the Atlanta Hawks, which Turner owned. And even though he was a big guy, he couldn't very well play basketball. So Stan Kasten, who was the general manager of the Hawks at the time, he called up folks over at WCW and said, I got this guy. You need to take a look at him. He could probably be a big wrestler. So they shuffled him over to wrestling.
Any memories of Matt Bourne, who was Big Josh at the time?
Honestly, no. I'm sorry, I don't have any memories of that.
Oh, that's okay. You said there was kind of a unique situation with Ron Simmons' paychecks. I'd love to hear about that.
Yes. Ron Simmons' wife, Lottie, never trusted him to bring the money home. So on payday, she would always come into the WCW office before Ron would get there, and she would relieve the office of his check and depart. And he would come in, and they would have no check for him because Lottie had the check. So he had to go home to get his allowance from Lottie if he wanted to spend any money.
Kept him in check, basically.
Kept him in check, absolutely.
What are your memories of the Macho Man, Randy Savage?
Randy was another guy who was quite interesting personality. I made a lot of merchandise for him. I made hats, foam hats like he had, and different shirts and foam fingers and crap like that for him. Sold $1 million of merchandise for him. It was great. Never really worked with him. Wanted to, but just didn't have the opportunity to get together with him, really.
And you mentioned, selling $1 million for Macho. Hogan, I'm sure, was the biggest or one of the biggest. Who are some of the other biggest as far as merchandise sales go?
Well, Hogan obviously was the top seller. Sting was a big seller, but again, you're talking about different dimensions. I mean, Hogan was at this level, and then Sting was like this level, and everybody else was down here. That's why WCW had a warehouse full of stuff that didn't sell. I mean, there wasn't anybody else to sell merchandise. They would create stuff for guys and would never sell, or the guy would be fired or disappear before the merchandise could hit the rack.
Right. And with the World Wrestling Federation, the promotional photos were always used for, press use only, newspapers and radio stations and that sort of thing, autograph signings occasionally. Was it the same with WCW? They weren't for sale to the fans. They were just kind of...
pretty much they weren't for sale. But I tried to put a different spin on some of these things, some of the merchandise things. So I created this whole catalog of proprietary merchandise. And one of the items I had were Ric Flair autographed pictures. Now, before I did that, I got a commitment from Flair that he would sign the pictures. There was about 500 pictures, and each one was going to be numbered, and each one came with a certificate of authenticity and with my name on it, and blah, 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 blah. And Flair promised me up and down that he would sign them. So when it came time to sign them, I got every excuse in the world why he was never going to sign them. And then he told me he would sign them on one of the tours to Germany. So I carried boxes of pictures for him to sign. And again, he stonewalled me on the trip. And we came back home, and WCW management was so pissed off that he wouldn't sign them that they actually deducted the cost of it from his paycheck. And he went ape. He went ballistic.
So they got him anyway.
Yeah. So ultimately, we got him to sign the pictures. And each one, like I said, was numbered. It was more like a collectible type of item. So it was pretty cool.
Why do you think Rick was so tough to work with sometimes?
Flair was impossible. Of all the people I loved in pro wrestling, the only person that I couldn't stand and still hate to this day is Flair.
One of the greats in the business, of course, but behind the scenes, just a tough one, right?
Rude, nasty, belligerent, reminding people who's the top dog. Never got out of his character, not for 1 second.
Yeah. I remember being at an event backstage with WWF. This was 2002, and I was working there for the day, and Ric Flair was just a few feet away, screaming and yelling on the top of his lungs at AT&T on the phone, and was saying, "Do you realize who I am?" And I'll never forget. I'll never forget that.
Yep. That was him.
Yeah.
Every day was the same with him. You couldn't have a normal conversation with him. I mean, I was actually shocked that he sat down with me and Steamboat at that dinner that we had. It was the only pleasant experience I ever had with Flair.
Wow. It's too bad.
It's a shame. I mean, because he didn't have to be that way, but that's the way he wanted to be.
Right. And let's talk about your senior marketing positions with different sports groups. Of course, the Atlanta Braves, the Atlanta Hawks, the Miami Dolphins, the Florida Panthers, Washington Nationals, the Washington Capitals, and the Baltimore Orioles. What an accomplishment just to work for one of those. And there you are with all of them. Let's hear about it.
Well, a number of these were owned by major groups. Turner Broadcasting owned the Hawks, the Braves, and the same with other teams. So in the case of those, I mean, I in my corporate roles, I got a chance to work for all of the teams and do different projects. The Capitals and the Baltimore Orioles were one-offs, and they were very early in my career. The Capitals, when their first year they came into existence, they were the only team to ever win. I think they only won eight games in the first year that they were in existence. So you had a hands full trying to do some marketing stuff for them. The Orioles were a wonderful team to deal with in the 70s. They were championship years, World Series years. Players were easily accessible, did anything they could to help support and promote the team. It was a real wonderful time to do that. After I left Turner and I went to work for Blockbuster, Blockbuster was actually owned by a gentleman named Wayne Huizenga. And Wayne Huizenga owned the Florida Panthers hockey team, and he owned the Miami Marlins, and he owned, I forget what other team. He didn't own the basketball team. Oh, he owned the Dolphins at that time. So again, in a corporate role, I had a chance to do projects for every one of the teams under the corporate ownership groups.
From a corporate standpoint, did you enjoy working for the sports teams more, or did you enjoy working for the wrestling side?
Oh, wrestling was a hoot. I mean, that was a lifetime job come true. I mean, I had this very eclectic career, Joseph. I mean, I've done so many really strange things. And then when I actually went into retirement, I did consulting work for different companies. So, one day I'd be dealing with mustard and another day with plumbing products and whatever else. So, I've had a chance to be involved with lots of different things, but most of it has been sports and sports marketing, professional sports.
And another name I want to bring up, you mentioned, Sting was a very nice guy backstage. Any personal memories working with Sting?
We would play cards on the road trips on all these international tours. It was cards every night on the bus to and from places. Sting was a gentleman. A real gentleman everywhere he was. One of the few guys who could separate his wrestling life from his personal life. And I always enjoyed riding with him and being part of his group.
Any memories of sensational Sherry Martel?
Yeah, Sherry. What comes to mind was the last tour we worked with her. She was unfortunately a lot of alcohol, a lot of drugs, and a very nice lady. Again, she treated me very respectfully, and I was the same with her. But unfortunately, my memories of her are more seeing her incapacitated or under the influence of drugs or alcohol. So there was a real talent there, but if she had eliminated some of those things, she could have just gone on to greater heights.
Sure. Now, do you have any keepsakes from, throughout your career, whether it be from the sports side or the wrestling side, maybe something that you hold close, you still have to this day?
Well, the thing that obviously stands out is the Blackburn Moat House thing to me. Yeah. When you're trying to keep blood in, and a large 6 foot something professional wrestler claiming he's dying and whatever else, and that's a lifetime experience. That's once in a lifetime.
Yeah. Let's hear about the other story with upsetting Rick Rude, ravishing Rick Rude.
Rick Rude. I'll try and be clean with this story. After I'd left the Blackburn and rejoined the tour up in Birmingham, England, I got into the hotel about 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning, and Rude was having breakfast in the lobby of the hotel, invited me to come sit down with him. So I sat down with him, and he starts to tell me, last night, I was feeling uncomfortable and I was feeling sore. And I asked the hotel manager where I could find a massage parlor. And I said, okay, do I really need to hear this story?
Yeah.
So he went into great detail about how he went down the street here and there, then went in a massage parlor, and then he came out feeling great. So that was my breakfast with Rick Rude.
Yeah. How about James Barnett, another individual that crossed paths?
Jim Barnett, another interesting individual. Jim, I'm sure you're well aware of Jim's history in the business and partially owning Georgia Championship Wrestling and then owning wrestling in Australia, World Championship Wrestling in Australia for some time. Jim was a consultant to Vince McMahon for a while, and after the Georgia Championship Wrestling sale fiasco, and then he became a consultant to Jim Crockett Promotions. And when Turner bought Jim Crockett Promotions, and Jim Barnett came along with it, and Jim's office was actually next to mine, directly next to mine. Jim had a water fountain, a live operating water fountain in the middle of his office. Wow. I don't know why. Plugged in somewhere, a water line from somewhere. I don't know. And, he used to, he was full of a lot of stories and a lot of knowledge also, that he would share on the wrestling business. But Jim was around, I'm trying to remember, I think Jim had some dealings with Rock Hudson, if you remember that story.
Yes.
Yeah. So Jim started to go into it one day, and then he got interrupted by a phone call, and I never got the finish of that story.
Oh, yeah.
But it was one I wanted to hear.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, I think you've had so many, great stories, and you certainly haven't been empty-handed when it comes to all the experiences you've had. So
No kidding.
it's fantastic. And, there was also some legal trouble over the Razor Ramon likeness. Obviously, Scott Hall had approached WCW, and he was there, but Razor Ramon was still going in WWF.
Yeah. I had been out of WCW for a couple of years and was working at Blockbuster in Fort Lauderdale, and I had a phone call from I forget the attorney's name, the WCW attorney. He wanted to talk to me about some issues. So he flew an attorney down, and they were trying to come up with the derivation of the Razor Ramon character, because WCW and WWE were trying to sue each other for rights of who owned the character. And then at the same time, Linda McMahon called me up and wanted to hire me to be vice president of marketing for WWE. And she flew me up to Greenwich, had lunch. She made me a chicken sandwich in her house.
Very nice.
Took me to the show, offered me a contract to be head of marketing for them. And the next day I politely refused and went back to Fort Lauderdale.
And was it just Linda at the house? Was Vince there?
Yeah, no, it was Linda at the house.
Yeah.
Just Linda.
And how was that experience talking with her?
Wow. It was interesting. I mean, they had a chauffeur pick me up at New York at the hotel, flew me up, and then there was a gated community. They lived next door to Diana Ross and some other people, and there was no lock on the door of their house. And the driver told me, just walk in. I mean, my parents taught me not to just walk in, so I'm trying to find a doorbell or somebody to knock on the door or whatever. And finally, they had somebody open the door. Huge mansion, incredible. I mean, my salary would have covered the electricity in the upstairs bathroom. I mean, it was just humongous. And so Linda greeted me. We sat down. She asked me if I had any food, went into the kitchen, maybe this chicken sandwich, and we talked contract and business.
I guess I have to ask, how was the chicken sandwich?
Oh, it was fine. It was fine. Apparently, her son Shane was born in the same hospital that my son was born in. Wow. So we had a little bit of conversation about that as well in Silver Spring, Maryland. But I decided that one tour of professional wrestling was more than enough. The contract, it was a great contract. It was about the time where Vince had canceled his deal with Bret Hart because he couldn't pay the salary.
Yes. And
I was worried that they might do the same with my contract. I mean, contracts mean nothing when it comes to Vince McMahon. You know, they hire you, they fire you, they pay off the contract. They don't care.
Yeah.
Money is no object. So I didn't want to be stuck up in Greenwich, Connecticut with no job and nothing to do.
Yeah.
And I just felt that it wasn't the right opportunity.
Sure. And you're probably right. But do you ever look back at it or think about it and say, man, I wonder, what if?
Well, I actually had second thoughts about 6 months later, and I tried to call Linda, and she wouldn't take my phone call. So, I gave it the old college try again, but I really didn't want to do that.
Yeah. Well, you only get the one chicken sandwich, only the one.
That's it. Especially when they couldn't pay salaries and they were, it just wasn't right. Something was going to come down the wrong way there. I just felt it.
Right. So the Shockmaster debut, let's talk about that briefly. The reaction backstage with the crew when that happened.
Well, I was actually next to Fred when that happened. And I had just come, I was in the truck, in the production truck, sitting with them while they were, actually producing the show. And then it's just, one of those classic moments where he trips and comes right through the wall. The helmet comes off. Yeah. The surprise is gone, and he's scrambling for the helmet to put it back on, but right. The moment was lost.
And I remember there, some of the audio was caught on television. You could hear Sid talking and Bulldog, and they were, oh, look at that, he fell. It was.
Oh yeah, it was. Oh Jesus. Now you asked me about some other great moments, and I just thought of another one. One time when we did the show in the UK, we brought Davey Boy Smith in to win the championship belt. It always was a big draw in the UK for him. Yeah. And I just sit there in the ring while they're playing Rule Britannia. And at the end, after he had won, another great moment to live.
Davey Boy, how was he behind the scenes?
I can't tell you much. I didn't work with him. I mean, he was one of the guys on the tour, and I never spent any time with him that tour.
Sure.
They just hired him for the tour. That was all.
Right. And then fast forward, many years from now, you're looking back at your career as a whole. What would you say is your legacy? How do you want to be remembered?
Well, I'd like to say I was able to create memorable moments for people. I was able to increase business for the companies that I worked for. And in most cases, I had a heck of a lot of fun while I was doing it.
Excellent. Richard, thank you so much for taking the time. It's just been a pleasure having you here and hearing all these great stories and your time within the business.
Thank you, Joseph. I hope everybody else enjoys them. And I look forward to hearing more of your broadcasts, your podcasts in the future.
Thank you so much for the great Richard Steinberg. I'm Joseph Bruen, and this has been the All Access Entertainment Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave your comments. Love to hear from you, the fans, what you thought of this episode, and we will see you all next time.